Welcome back to the Revolving Door of Metaphor. I'm Brian Alexander, and last time we covered the first 5 films of the Godzilla franchise, detailing how Godzilla went from a metaphor of nuclear horror to being a protector of Earth. We'll be continuing with the next 5 films in the franchise: Invasion of Astro Monster, Ebirah Horror of the Deep, Son of Godzilla, Destroy All Monsters, and All Monsters Attack. We'll also be detailing about how the filmmakers worked around their own grievances of Godzilla becoming a more child-friendly character. Following Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, Invasion of Astro Monster has the interesting challenge of figuring out how to navigate a post-heroic turn for Godzilla. Shockingly, the solution the filmmakers arrived at was making a movie that doesn't really need Godzilla. Seriously, think about it. If you replaced all the monsters with weapons of mass destruction, you'd practically have the same film. Ishiro Honda, who was very vocal about his dissatisfaction with Godzilla becoming a more child-friendly character, effectively renders the monsters in this movie irrelevant by crafting a story that works perfectly well without them. In fact, I would argue Invasion of Astro Monster is one of the only films in the franchise that works just as well without the monsters as it does with them. So, how does this extend to Godzilla's on-screen portrayal? Could Godzilla have a deeper metaphorical meaning in a film that does not require his presence? Essentially, no. Other than the point I brought up about them being easily replaceable with weapons of mass destruction. The monsters have little deeper meaning beyond the growing resemblance to forces in nature. We see this shift with Godzilla and Rodan being discovered in a lake and a mountain respectively. Before we move on, I would be a poor guide for this franchise if I didn't mention the famous, or infamous depending on your opinion, scene where Godzilla performs a victory dance after a battle with King Ghidorah, further anthropomorphizing Godzilla. While I do enjoy the scene, it does devalue what metaphorical weight Godzilla could have. Godzilla is no longer a creature that we're meant to look upon in awe. He's a mascot that the home team has that we're supposed to cheer for. Oh, Ebirah Horror of the Deep, you sweet summer child. We go from the peak of Godzilla films, in my personal opinion, to one of the lowest outings the series has to offer. It's unfortunate too, since this is the debut of Jun Fuketa, the second most prominent director of Godzilla, just behind Ishiro Honda in his influence on the franchise. Back in the first episode, I discussed how Godzilla might represent a hurricane or a typhoon in his original outing, but this spot has been taken over by the villain monster in this film, Ebirah. And I use the term villain monster very, very loosely because, like the previous film, the monsters really aren't essential to the story, though, as I'm sure you can tell by my tone of voice, it doesn't really work for me this time around. You could easily just make the story about a terrorist organization that is set up on an island that is surrounded by storms that causes ships to sink. Despite this though, there's actually a lot of fun things to analyze about Godzilla in this film. For arguably the first time in the series, Godzilla is a truly neutral party in the larger story. Godzilla shows up halfway through, not to stop the villains or be heroic, he just kinda shows up and things happen. Godzilla fights Ebirah literally as soon as he wakes up, and then battles a fleet of fighter jets after they attack him for really no good reason. It has no bearing on the actual plot. These scenes could be easily removed and nothing would really change. He just ends up being a chaotic factor in this film with no real motivations. On top of this, Godzilla is awoken by and seemingly charged by electricity, which he was weakened by just a few movies ago in King Kong vs. Godzilla. Now, this could imply with Godzilla's shift in character, he's also shifted in what abilities he has and has become more part of the natural world. Or this film was originally written to be a King Kong movie, and so they just kind of scribbled out King Kong's name and wrote in Godzilla there. Either way, it just doesn't work for me. Now here's where things get interesting. Son of Godzilla, depending on where you stand, is either where the franchise truly loses its way, or how it discovered to evolve with the changing times and become a truly timeless entity capable of incredible evolution. I fall into the latter group. Not only do I think this is one of the best films Jun Fuketa makes, but it is instrumental in figuring out how Godzilla can truly work as a protagonist. This is all singularly dependent on one character, Minya. Minya is the character that finally makes Godzilla's transition from villain to hero work. Now let me explain. In the film, Godzilla discovers Minya as he's being attacked by a group of Kamacuruses. Kamakurakai? Kamakuraki? Never mind. After this encounter, Godzilla adopts Minya as his own and begins to teach him how to be a kaiju. Godzilla becomes a father figure, teaching Minya how to survive in this harsh environment, sometimes though with a bit of tough love. In becoming a father to a son, Godzilla is provided the perfect segue to become a teacher and even a father figure for the audience. Godzilla isn't properly introduced in this film until after the human characters have already abused their scientific knowledge and caused massive mutations in the creatures on the island the film is set. Now, with this setup, you could absolutely apply it to a film where Godzilla is the bad guy, but it also works here. Godzilla essentially working as a you-know-better type of character. Godzilla cleans up our mess and essentially reinstates himself as the same character as the original film, a beast to warn humanity of its arrogance, but from a far more benevolent role. Destroy All Monsters is a tough cookie to crack. On one hand, it's clearly meant to be the spectacle film intended to close out the franchise with a big special effects blowout. On the other hand, Ishiro Honda is back in the director's chair, so it's assured that his influence on the film will absolutely lend itself to some deeper meanings behind the carnage. With that in mind, the film begins in the far-off distant future of 1999! Can we cut? Honda clearly inserts his globalist ideals, with humanity finally being at peace with each other. Not only that, but the world's monsters are held on a remote island location called Monsterland, where they seem quite content with life in what is essentially a zoo exhibit. I don't think the monsters living peacefully and humanity coexisting with each other is a coincidence. Could the monsters in this context still represent WMDs safely locked away, since mankind has grown past the need for them? Perhaps the monsters represent the inherent aggression in people, which has also been safely locked away in this idealistic future. Despite this, the film still has the through line that those who are not from Earth, aliens, or the other are still evil. Could this be a very subtle reference to the fact that foreign invaders, America, are still not to be trusted in this future? Or perhaps it's the idea that humanity, when given a cause, is able to unite despite our differences. I also want to mention that there is a fleeting glimpse of what the franchise could have been. At the end of the attack on Tokyo, there is a simple moment showing the decimated remains of Tokyo after it's been attacked by monsters. A small, somber moment that brings the science fiction back down to reality. A glimmer of what Godzilla was and what it could have been, which is fitting since this film was meant to close out the Godzilla franchise. Obviously, it did not. From the moment Godzilla began his transition to a more child-friendly character, Ishiro Honda, one of the founding fathers of the character and director of so many of the films up to this point, was against the growing anthropomorphizing of the monster. Godzilla was a testament not only to Japan's collective trauma over the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but to Honda's own trauma from what he experienced during the war and what he experienced in its aftermath. For the character to be more or less trivialized to kid stuff must have been tough on Honda. However, I think that All Monsters Attack is where Honda is finally able to make peace with what his creature had become, and where he finally understands what his audience loves about Godzilla. All Monsters Attack takes place in the real world. Godzilla is a fictional character in this film. It follows a young boy, Ichiro, who escapes from his everyday problems by imagining himself interacting with his favorite characters, which is something that everyone can relate to. Every person on Earth has done this, and you're a dirty liar if you deny this. Honda showcases a fundamental understanding of his audience at the time. Children who watched these films were under a lot of stress, as is Ichiro. The economic landscape in Japan at the time forced a lot of parents to work long hours, leaving their children without supervision. They needed guidance in a form that wasn't an adult telling them what to do. That's where fictional characters come in. Every person has a character that affected them in some way, changed their life for the better, made them want to aspire to be better. Godzilla is a character that fills that role. Godzilla, for many, myself included, is a symbol of strength for the weak, as Ichiro is in the film. It's really profound how Honda figured out what Godzilla meant to others beside himself and crafted a story to reflect that. It's just a shame that Ichiro took the lessons he learned and assaulted an essential worker like an annoying little shit.